Hello and welcome to my office. I'm Dr. John Burton here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm licensed as a professional counselor and I have a practice called Educare Counseling. In this presentation, we're going to look at ways of reaching neutral. Neutral is a very interesting place. We often end up in this place of our primitive brain, our ego self, and it gets in a way that creates a lot of emotional intensity and very little productive output. We end up experiencing and expending a whole lot of energy, and we usually end up in kind of a negative emotional state, or one in which we're impulsive, or one in which we're angry and wound up or stressed out, and it leads to responses that aren't in our best interest and usually don't create positive outcomes. So we don't necessarily have to get to our highest consciousness, our place of unity consciousness or divine light all the time, at least awareness of it, but at least we can get to a place that we could call neutral. We're not stuck in the rut of the ego self or the primitive brain, and we're able to then restore a sense of freedom and freedom of choice and options that allow us to be more comfortable. So I'm going to go through about 10 categories, I guess you could say, types of ways of reaching neutral. The first one is actually 3: patience, foresight, flexibility. Patience, foresight, flexibility. These 3 traits immediately access our sort of higher functioning self because they are not existing in the primitive brain. The primitive brain is impulsive, short-sighted, and rigid. Always, only. It can't be otherwise. It's unable to do anything else. It's got a very interesting perceptual style, such that whatever it sees, it believes that's all there is. Like if my ego self is standing here in this room, I can see some windows, I can see a wall, and I can see a wall. So in my ego's sense, this room only has 3 walls. Very interesting. How strange, a room with 3 walls. If I turn this way, well, I see this wall, this wall, this wall. Well, you know, I'm right, this room only has 3 walls. Because I can't carry over very well from, in my ego self anyway, can't carry over. I only know what I see right now, and my ego self believes that everything it sees is all there is. It believes it's omnipotent. It believes it's all-knowing. It believes that whatever it's aware of is all there is to be aware of. And so it creates this rigidity, it creates this impulsiveness, and it creates this short-sightedness. It can't look beyond the moment to see what consequences might occur. So just by invoking patience, foresight, or flexibility, you actually get all 3. I'll tell you a story about when I was looking for this office that I currently occupy. Our lease was about to end. This was about 3 years ago, 3.5 actually. Our lease was about to end and we needed to find a new office space, my wife and I. And so we were looking around and we were kind of caught between rock and a hard place in a sense. Our lease was coming up soon and we couldn't find a place. And we thought, well, we want a place with just 2 offices because she wants one and I want one. So we got to have a 2-office scenario. Man, that's hard to come by when there's 2 offices available. We kept looking, kept looking, kept looking. We knew what we wanted. We wanted a new office space. We wanted a new office space that would be conducive for both of us to do our healing arts practice. So we were committed to the what, but we got hung up on the how. It has to be a certain 2-office space only. Turns out we found a space, but it has 5 offices, and we're able to have another group of practitioners in the healing arts come in and join us. So it worked out beautifully. So we have this entire environment. But if we got too hung up on the how, in other words, just a 2-office space, we'd still be looking. Or we'd have found something, but it would have been a compromise we didn't like. So we committed to the what. We want an office that's conducive to our healing arts practice. But we allowed the how part of it to kind of unfold, to come to us with information, to become open to how Spirit would guide us to what it was that was in our highest and greatest good. So patience allows more information to come in. It allows us to recognize that there's always more to the story. It allows the bigger picture. And then once you do patience, you also interestingly get foresight, because then you can look into the future. When you pause without having to be impulsively taking action, you can actually imagine how things could play out in the future. Here's a scenario, let's see how that works. No, that won't work. As opposed to impulsive saying, I've got to have an office with 2 spaces, let's take it. No, it's so noisy, it's too crowded in the parking lot, blah, blah. So patience allows foresight to see how it's going to play out, any kind of potential decision. It lets you look at how the how is going to play out. And so it gives you the opportunity to see consequences, potential consequences. And then flexibility is a very interesting thing, because if you're patient, yes, you get foresight, but you also, in the process of gaining foresight, you recognize alternative pathways. You see multiple hows. You see multiple roadways to get to your destination. So then you have flexibility. It's like, I'm going to go down here, and then about halfway down, I'm going to turn this way. So it creates interesting options. So patience, foresight, and flexibility are really potent ways of getting out of your primitive brain and into your higher functioning creative self. And they get us into that neutral place. People often have arguments about how instead of about what. Most people agree on what. The how becomes sometimes where rigidity gets in the way. So if you can access patience, foresight, and flexibility, then you create many options for yourself. It also takes out the pressure. But there's also a kind of an interesting diminishing return on those three things. Patience is not passive. Some people kind of mix the two together. If I'm being patient, I'm being passive. No, that's the primitive brain's interpretation of patience. Patience means purposeful waiting. I'm waiting with specific information. I'm waiting to collect more information that's going to inform me so I can make a better decision. It's not just disengaging and being passive, it's purposeful waiting. It's got a reason, a goal. So that way we use patience and use it with a good purpose and a good goal in mind. Same with foresight. I can look down the road and I can see the scenario on, God, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 things. But then there's a diminishing return on that. At what point do I decide, okay, I've seen enough, I've got enough information through my patience, it's time to make a decision, time to take action. And then I can get feedback on that decision. It's not like once I make a decision, that's it. That's the other thing about the primitive brain. It's so rigid that if I make this decision, I have to stick with it. I can't update it, I can't modify it, can't change my mind, and it's detrimental. So when we're in our higher functioning self, we have flexibility. It's like, okay, I'm starting on this track, I've decided this is the best one, but you know, I really do need to modify that. I need to look in a different part of town for my office. I need to look into the idea of a multiple office suite space. So allowing that flexibility creates many more options. And so we can also have too much flexibility. I mean, I can shift and adjust to any and everything, but I've lost my purpose at that point. Purpose allows a certain degree of flexibility without being rudderless. Purpose organizes our choices. So when we can find patience, we also get foresight and flexibility, and that gets us into a neutral place where we can be in sort of a wise observer role, and then we can make much more informed decisions that are effective for us. The next pathway to neutral is tolerating ambiguity, or the unknown. How much is unknown? Well, the second that's coming right after this one is unknown. The day after this one is unknown. The year after this is unknown. Everything in the future is unknown. But our primitive brain treats the unknown as dangerous because it feels like it has to know everything that's coming up. And sometimes we organize our life in such a rigid way that we create a whole lot of knowns called routines, called ruts, called loops. We don't change because anything new is scary. Maybe you know people who won't eat certain foods or only eat certain foods. They go out to eat and that's all they're ever going to have because, oh, I don't want to try something new, it might hurt me. And what hurts probably more is not trying something new. And so this tolerance of the unknown is an amazing gift you can give yourself. To be able to tolerate the unknown until it declares itself, until the fog lifts and it declares itself. It's sort of akin to foresight, but what it's really doing is just being aware of, I don't know and it's okay. Because if you make an impulsive decision based on, I just have to make a decision because it's too uncomfortable in the unknown, then very often it doesn't work well. So being able to tolerate ambiguity or the unknown is an incredibly powerful gift. It allows you to make a much more informed decision. And what you get from that is the beauty of clarity, the next step in the process of reaching neutral. The beauty of clarity. If you wait for things to unfold, if you allow yourself to tolerate the unknown, then the unknown becomes known. Things unfold, things become clearer, things become more evident and the fog lifts, and then you get clarity. Now, we don't always like the clarity we get. Say if you're in a relationship and it's like, you know, I really want to settle down with somebody, I really want to end up in a lifetime partner relationship. And we're dating somebody and it's like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I just don't want to be without. So I'm going to forego my willingness to tolerate the unknown, and I'm going to forego my need or desire for the benefit of the clarity, and I'm just going to jump into the relationship and make it permanent no matter what. Oops, turns out this person isn't faithful. Turns out this person is really bad with money and likes to spend it on all kinds of stuff, and maybe they even have a gambling problem, I'm not so sure. And so this unwillingness to tolerate the ambiguity and get the gift of the clarity sets us up for trouble. We then limit ourselves in our choices. But if we can wait for the clarity, even though the answer may not be the one we seek, we can then say, okay, that relationship really isn't going to work. And maybe it comes back to faith, maybe it comes back to trust in the universe. But that if we choose impulsively something that doesn't work and we sort of know it deep down inside, we end up creating the very thing we don't want. Which is very interesting. When the primitive brain has a strategy that it organizes to solve a problem, it creates the very thing it's trying to prevent. Because it ignores the red flags in that relationship. Maybe this guy's a little bit hot-headed. Maybe he speaks very badly of other people. Well, it's just a matter of time till that gets turned on you. So if we can allow ourselves to not let our primitive brain set up our strategies for solving problems, but rather defer to our higher self, then we allow that clarity to be known and we say, well, good thing I know that, because now I can move to a healthier, safer, more harmonious relationship, because there is one. It's allowing it to happen. Again, patience, foresight, flexibility, tolerating the unknown, and the beauty of clarity that occurs because of that. Spirit provides. You ask, it responds every time. So then we move to another area of reaching neutral, and I call it needful perceptions. And these have a lot of overlap, but needful perceptions is when we need something to go a certain way and we go blind to the factual information that's coming in. I need something to go a certain way. I need somebody to really like me, so I sacrifice me. I conform and contort and become the chameleon that I think they want me to be. Turns out they don't like me because I'm not even being authentic. Turns out that they wanted somebody who really was being authentic. It's like, say you're on a date with somebody or you're in a relationship and you want to make friends or even have it become more of a significant relationship, and you try to figure out what kind of music do they like. Well, let's see. Oh, I think they like jazz. So I load up on CDs of jazz and they come over to my place and I'm playing jazz and they go, I don't much like jazz. Oh, crap. And so I've set myself up because I need it to go a certain way and I try to shape something in an unnatural manner. And I ignore information that I could actually collect. Like, what kind of music do you like? That'd be simple enough. Or I ignore red flags when somebody becomes, like I say, hot-headed or in some ways is very negative about other people or shows a propensity toward just detrimental or self-defeating behaviors. So if we have a strong need, it's going to influence our objectivity and our ability to be in that sort of wise observer role. So if we can allow that to not be driving us, we can step out of those needful perceptions and get into that place of being the observer and being therefore in a neutral place, because we're not attached to the outcome anymore. We also aren't doing something that says, if this doesn't work, I'm no good. We're not doing an egocentric personalizing of this. So if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. It's like trying shoes on at the shoe store. If they don't fit or they don't feel comfortable when you walk around in them, it doesn't mean your feet are bad. It doesn't mean the shoes are bad. It just didn't fit. And you'll find some that do, because there's a few thousand pair around. So there's always a solution, and solutions pre-exist problems. It's a matter of finding it. Problem is just a problem because it's missing an ingredient, so to speak. It's missing a point of view sometimes, or an ingredient. So back to the shoe store metaphor, if you try on some shoes, you really like them, but they don't fit and they're uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you won't find a pair that works, because solutions pre-exist problems. There's a pair of shoes already existing that will fit perfectly. Just like in my search for the office space. This space existed before I knew of it. I just had to find it. And so it pre-existed my solution, or my problem, so to speak. It was already happening before I decided there was a dilemma. And then I allowed myself to find this space, and then there is the solution. It was just waiting to be discovered. So solutions pre-exist problems. The next category of reaching neutral I would call false negatives. Maybe you've had medical tests before. You've probably heard of the concept of false negatives and false positives. False positive is where a test comes back and says you have something and it turns out you really don't. It was false positive. False negative is where the test says you don't have something, but it turns out you actually do. And so false negatives are also something we do in ourself. We tell ourselves from our primitive brain, our critical self, false negatives. We tell ourselves what we aren't. We tell ourselves what we are in a negative sense, and they aren't true. So that inner critic that likes to judge and likes to put ourselves down and tell ourselves we're not good enough for what? I don't know. But tells us that we're not good enough, we're not worthy of love, etc. We can't succeed, all kinds of negative comments. That critical self can be dealt with in three particular ways, just to get to a place of neutral. The first is that whatever criticism is made inside, it can only be about the behavior, the choice, so to speak, but not the self. Criticism can only be made about the behavior or the choice, but not the self, which is a very different thing. Yes, that choice was not, well, it didn't work out right, but I'm not an idiot. That choice just wasn't a good one. Okay, well, since solutions pre-exist problems, let me go on searching for that solution so that I don't get stuck in the place where I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever, false negative. So we go back to that place of, all right, I can criticize the behavior, I can criticize the choice, but not the self. Another interesting way to get out of that sort of self-critical space is to think of at least 3, if not 5, maybe even 7 positive things you've done, successful, effective things you've done, after the critical self starts judging you for a mistake. Because what happens in the primitive brain is it like opens up a file. It says, oh, let's look at every mistake you've ever made. And it just starts naming them off. And then pretty soon you're downgraded in terms of your worth. And it just keeps on going because it loves to do that, because that's what it does. It tries hard to make us a better person, except it goes about it in what I call the bad coach way. It criticizes instead of uplifting. And so if we're going to reach neutral out of that place of negativity and judgment, start listing the positive and effective and successful things you've done. By the time you've listed 3, 5, maybe 7, you've shifted gears in your brain out of the primitive self into a sort of a neutral, higher functioning part of self, so that you're not stuck in that downward spiral of self-criticism. An interesting third way is that that critical part loves to criticize, but it has a very limited skill set. All it knows how to do is judge and criticize. But if you say, okay, you're allowed to criticize critical self, but only if you also propose a solution. So if you're going to criticize, you have to finish it or couple it with a proposed solution. That's when it goes silent, because it has no clue how to solve anything. So if you put the onus on it, say, yeah, okay, go ahead, criticize, and then tell me what would be better. It hasn't got anything. It's got nothing. And so when you do that, it kind of silences that critic. Or if it comes up with an idea, great, fine, thanks. But it shifts the gear also. It gets you out of that primitive brain into a neutral place, because it extracts you from that one-on-one barrage from the primitive brain. And so, yeah, ask it for a solution. If you say that's no good, what is? It's probably not going to have an answer. In which case you're free to leave the room, so to speak, and go to a place of your higher self that knows more and is wiser and more creative. There's an interesting place, I call it portals to the divine. Years ago, Wayne Dyer wrote a book on getting into the gap, about in between breaths, as being sort of a place where you can access the divine energy, the divine light. And sort of working off of that, there are countless processes that happen around us and even in us. Breathing is one, and after the exhale, there is that sort of stillness, that quietness that is sort of a portal to the divine. But notice how after every action, there is a pause. Whether it's a leaf falling from a tree to the ground and then pause. That's a portal to the divine. The breeze is blowing and the tree is moving back and forth, it stops. There's a pause. Portal to the divine, meaning that it gives you free access to the infinite divine light. It's like an opening to that place, that stillness. After every task, after a meal, after a purchase, when you're driving and you come to a red light, there's a pause. Everything after a cycle, so to speak, there's a pause. It can be seasonal. It can be minute to minute. It can be 20 times a minute with your breath. It can be twice a day. It can be once a month. It can be once every 3 months. But there are countless portals, so to speak, to the divine, so that every process has a cycle to it. And in between the cycle, before the next one starts, there's a possible opportunity to go in and connect with the stillness, the quietness, the sacredness of the divine, so that you're surrounded by this. All over the place there are these cycles going on. Notice them, recognize them, absorb them in some ways, connect with them, embrace them, receive them. It's a beautiful way of knowing that you're surrounded by the sacredness constantly. Countless ways, countless rhythms, countless cycles. Know that you're surrounded and enjoy those. Get you maybe more than neutral at that point. Next portal, or next opportunity I should say, to reach neutral is what I call the bubble of is. It's actually impossible to do any negative or unpleasant emotion in the present. We say, what? What do you mean? It's impossible to do any unpleasant emotion in the present. If I want to do anxiety or generate anxiety, I have to think about the future and in a particular negative way. If I am in the present, everything's actually okay. Right here, right now, everything's fine. Yeah, but what about that bill I got to pay? Well, that's next week. Or that's tomorrow. It's not now. So anxiety can only be generated by going into the future and imagining an unwanted scenario. But in the present, there is no anxiety that's possible. Same with depression and anger. Depression is often about the past, but it can also be about an anticipated loss. But again, it's not in the present. In the present, everything is. It's that infinite place, that eternal place where all is. And there you are in sacred divine light, where everything just is. There is no such thing as loss. There's just everything. And so getting into that neutral place where the bubble of is, also it's impossible to generate anger. You're full in that sacred space. You are in that sacred light. You are satisfied, satiated, silent, peaceful. There is nothing else. You can't generate anxiety, depression, or anger in the bubble of is. And so when we come back to the moment, in the present, which one way to do that is just observe nature. Watch the squirrel, watch the wind blow the trees, watch the bird fly from one tree to another, or sit there and sing. Watch the flowers and the plants and the trees. Just observe nature. Watch the clouds in the sky. And just notice the moment, the eternal is, the constant is. And in that place, we're kind of in a selfless kind of place. We're just being. And we're comfortable, peaceful, all is well. It's Eckhart Tolle's power of now kind of place. So that in the moment, we're fine. Just like this one. Just like this one. And so it goes on and on and on. The challenge, of course, is to recognize that when we feel uncomfortable emotions, it's not to take them literally and jump into the deep end of the anxiety, anger, or sadness, but rather to recognize those are cues and signals we've left the present. Elvis has left the building, and so he feels anxious. And so we come back to the present, we find that, oh, the anxiety was actually a pointer, a reminder, an invitation to come back to the present. We don't take it literally and analyze it and dissect it. We just come back to the present. Just be here, in the moment, be here now. Just be in the moment. So that those uncomfortable emotions are just reminders and signals to say, I'm speculating or I'm reminiscing. Let me come back here. No time, only now, only is. Get you out of that primitive brain bind. Another way to get to neutral is to override that tendency we all have to compare ourselves to others. Part of our primitive brain especially is in constant search of reassurance. How are we doing? Are we doing well enough? Am I doing better than somebody else? How am I doing? Especially if we take on a new task, then it's really wanting to know, how am I doing with this new thing? Am I excelling? Am I beating others? Am I up to the standard of everybody else? And so when we're in that place of comparing, we recognize first, that's my primitive brain. And what it's going to do is take a small excerpt of somebody else, usually doing really, really well, and compare it to myself, so that we get a misleading representation. We only take one small sample of one person, one feature, and they're really great at this, well, I suck. Oops. And then if I'm going to generalize, then I suck not just at that, but I suck, period. I'm inferior. I'm not good enough. But if we stay out of that place of comparing and recognize underneath that tendency to compare, there's a need. There's just a simple need. What is that need? When we want to compare ourselves to others, what are we really looking for? What do we really need? Reassurance. That I'm okay, that I'm lovable, that I'm competent. Just reassurance of my worth as a being. Well, where do I get that? One way is simply to go into that space of the now, the is. Another way is to go to that higher consciousness. Sit in that place of stillness where there are no questions. There's just pure being. The whole idea of competence, the whole idea of comparing is irrelevant, moot, pointless. You just are, and you're fine. So that when we want to compare, recognize what we're really looking for, what we really need, And then you can utilize that and address the need more directly, because otherwise you're going to compare and find 3 more people and 12 more people and 25 more people, and it just doesn't end, because the primitive brain doesn't actually have an off switch when it does that kind of stuff. It has an endless search because nothing actually satisfies it. So if we come back and go under it and say, okay, what's my need? Reassurance. Okay, I know where I can find that. And then you take care of it. Because everybody's on a different path, on a different, different realm, and with different resources, and comparisons really don't ever hold up anyway. They're always misleading. They never have any validity. So another way to get to that neutral place is a very intriguing kind of experience with peripheral vision. We have 2 ways that our eyes work. One is called foveal vision, where I look directly at you and you're in focus and everything around you is kind of blurry. The other is peripheral vision. Some call it soft eyes, but peripheral vision is when I'm looking straight at you, but everything around you is blurry. Rather, I'm looking at you, but I can also see the windows to my right and my lamp to my left. So I'm looking in this direction, but I can see about 180 degrees. And if I lock in on these 2 things equally, kind of find that balance point, I'm in peripheral vision. And what happens is I shift from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one that relaxes us. I learned this, I'm sure it's been taught in many different ways, but I learned this while I was playing with that thing called the Magic Eye, which used to be a really popular kind of comic strip, where it was a 2-dimensional drawing, but if you looked at it and got soft eyes and went peripheral vision, there'd be a 3D image that would pop out of it that was completely different than the drawing. And so by doing so, what we do is access a different part of our nervous system, with the one that relaxes us, the one that lets go. And so we get into a neutral state of mind again, of just kind of pure being. You'll notice that when you go into peripheral vision, your breathing slows down, your heart rate slows down, your muscle tension releases, and you go into kind of a pure state of being. You'll also notice that when you're in peripheral vision, your mind actually goes silent, because there's no focus. There's actually nothing we're focusing on, therefore there are no thoughts. And so in peripheral vision, we get to a really comfortable place of neutral. And in so doing, we get out of that primitive brain trap. So enjoy. This is also a very portable thing. You can do it in line at the grocery store. You can do it at the red light. You can do it anytime, anywhere. And you can still engage fully with whatever you're doing or whoever you're talking to, but you can do it from peripheral vision. It's actually how we drive when we go somewhere. Most of the time we're in peripheral vision because we can notice motion better. And so we come to when somebody's brake lights come on, but most of the time we're in peripheral vision when we're driving, which may be why sometimes after we take a drive in the country, an hour later we come back and go, man, I feel refreshed. I just feel more relaxed. Maybe it's because, at least in part, for that hour we were mostly in peripheral vision. Who knows? But peripheral vision will relax and get us into a nice neutral state of mind and out of the primitive brain. So enjoy playing with that one as well. And so these are 10 ways to get to a neutral state of mind. Use them anytime. The more you practice, the more they become familiar, habitual, and it's a skill set, so that you can develop these ways of thinking and or doing that help you shift out of the traps of the primitive brain, the illusions and deceptions of it, into a place of neutrality and higher creativity and just a greater sense of well-being and ability. So enjoy the neutral, which is actually more than neutral. It becomes positive just by being out of the negative. Enjoy.